All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're tracking one of the most unbelievable transformations in human history. We are going to look at how a tiny, nameless farming settlement on the banks of the Tiber River evolved into the greatest empire the Western world has ever seen. It's a story packed with incredible ambition, devastating violence, and a legacy that quite literally built the world we live in today.
Picture this. It's 750 BC, smack in the middle of Italy. And the reality is, well, it's pretty bleak. No army, no wealth, absolutely zero power. There were no grand walls, there was no king, just a small group of a few hundred people simply trying to survive. If you looked at this muddy little village back then, you would never ever guess what it was destined to become. They had absolutely nothing, except for a deep hunger and a fierce refusal to accept limits.
But then, you fast forward 800 years, and the sheer scale is just mind-blowing. From that struggling village, they exploded outwards, pushing their borders from Scotland all the way down to Egypt, and from Portugal over to Persia. They commanded a staggering 1 million soldiers. Across this vast expanse of the known world, there was one language and one single law enforcing order. So how exactly did they pull that off? To pack 1,200 years of seriously complex history into one narrative, here is our chronological roadmap. We're going from village to republic, looking at the unstoppable war machine, the death of the republic, the Roman peace, how the empire cracks, and finally, its immortal legacy.
All right, part 1, from village to republic, violent origins.
So, according to legend, the city was founded in 753 BC by twin brothers Romulus and Remus. And get this, they were supposedly raised by a she-wolf, which honestly tells you almost everything you need to know about their whole vibe, right? They were destined for greatness. But it wasn't exactly a peaceful start. Romulus literally kills his brother Remus in a fight over where to build the city walls, making himself the first king. Whether that myth is 100% true or not, it tells us exactly who the Romans believed they were, a people born in violence with a massive hunger for power. But after 2 centuries of kings, the Romans pulled off something totally revolutionary in 509 BC.
They kicked their king out entirely and came up with a radical new concept, the Republic. It was a brilliantly paranoid system, really, showing just how terrified they were of tyranny. It was a government by the people, but it featured 2 elected leaders called consuls who actually had to share power. It was designed to guarantee that no single man could ever rule alone. It was wild for the ancient world, and amazingly, it worked for 500 years.
Moving right along to part 2, the unstoppable war machine, relentless expansion.
Now, you might be wondering, how did they conquer the entire Mediterranean? Well, it was practically all down to their intense military obsession. The Roman army wasn't just a force, it was the engine that built the empire. Every single Roman citizen could be called up to fight. They trained relentlessly. We're talking about guys who marched 20 miles a day in full armor and then built a heavily fortified camp from scratch every single night. And in battle, they used this famous testudo or tortoise formation where they'd lock their shields above and around them, creating this unstoppable human tank that just refused to stop moving forward.
But hey, Rome wasn't invincible. Starting in 264 BC, they faced their ultimate nightmare, the brutal Punic Wars against Carthage, which was the most powerful trading empire around at the time. And during the Second War, Rome was almost wiped completely off the map. This Carthaginian general, Hannibal Barca, pulled off the impossible. The guy actually crossed the frozen Alps in the dead of winter, bringing with him a terrifying weapon of 37 war elephants. He just marched straight into Italy and started winning battle after battle.
And that led to an absolute bloodbath. At Cannae, in 216 BC, Hannibal totally surrounded and annihilated a Roman army. We're talking 70,000 men lost in a single afternoon. To this day, it's the greatest military disaster in Roman history. Any normal nation would have thrown in the towel immediately. But Rome just stubbornly refused to lose. They literally just kept raising new armies over and over, until finally Carthage broke, and Rome entirely ruled the Mediterranean.
Which brings us to part 3, death of the Republic, rise of dictators.
So here's the catch with all that winning. Massive external victory brought insane internal wealth. And suddenly, generals had more juice in the government itself. The Republic started buckling. Enter Julius Caesar. Brilliant, incredibly charming, and utterly ruthless. First, he conquers Gaul, which is modern-day France, in just 8 years, literally writing his own legend by sending PR reports back to Rome.
Then, when the Senate orders him to give up his army, he makes the most famous choice in history. In 49 BC, he crosses the Rubicon River, sparking a massive civil war. He wins, declares himself dictator for life, and then, well, then comes the violent end. On March 15, 44 BC, the Ides of March, Caesar gets stabbed 23 times in the Senate by his own friends and peers. And the irony? He died right at the foot of a statue of his greatest enemy. You can't make this stuff up.
All right, part 4. The Roman Peace. Pax Romana begins.
Turns out, assassinating Caesar definitely didn't save the Republic. It just kicked off even more civil wars. That is, until Caesar's adopted son Octavian crushed every last rival, including Mark Antony and Cleopatra. By 30 BC, Octavian was the last man standing. He takes the name Augustus, becomes the very first emperor, and completely overhauls the system. He actually bragged that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He sets up a professional standing army, a postal system, police, and even a fire brigade. He was running a capital city of 1 million people, all tied together by an unbelievable 400,000-kilometer road network that reached every single corner of his empire.
And this whole machine hit its absolute peak under Emperor Trajan in 117 AD. To put these stats into perspective, they were managing 5 million square kilometers of territory, stretching from the rain of northern England to the scorching deserts of North Africa. 70 million people were living under Roman law, speaking Latin, and spending Roman coin. This kicked off the Pax Romana, 200 years of unprecedented stability. Honestly, it was the longest stretch of peace Europe would see for the next 1,500 years.
But, of course, nothing lasts forever. Part 5. The Empire Cracks. A Divided World.
By the 3rd century AD, the cracks in the foundation were just getting way too big to ignore. The army was insanely expensive, the borders were stretched way too thin, and barbarian tribes were pushing in from literally everywhere. Plus, the political chaos was off the charts. Listen to this, 50 emperors were assassinated in just 50 years. It got so dysfunctional that in 285 AD, Emperor Diocletian was forced to literally slice the empire in half just to keep it running. You had the Western Empire anchored in Rome, and the Eastern Empire building a brand new hub at Constantinople.
Now that eastern half, it actually managed to hold on for another 1,000 years. But the West was falling apart. In 410 AD, the absolute unthinkable happened. The eternal city of Rome was completely sacked and looted by the Visigoth king Alaric. Romans everywhere were just paralyzed with shock. And then finally, in 476 AD, the last emperor of the West, a kid named Romulus, ironically enough, was quietly pushed off the throne by a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer. There was no big, epic battle, no final trumpet blast. 1,200 years of Roman history just fizzled out.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 6, The Immortal Legacy. Rome never died.
You might be thinking, well, that's the end of the line, right? But what's truly fascinating is that while the physical empire collapsed, its ghost never really left us. The Catholic Church kept the Latin language alive for centuries across Europe. Fair, written Roman law, that became the absolute bedrock for every Western legal system today. Their architecture inspired our most important buildings, from the Renaissance right up to the United States Capitol. Seriously, every time you check a calendar or drive down a perfectly straight road or expect to be treated fairly under the law, you are living directly in the shadow of Rome.
There's a famous saying, the Roman Empire fell, but Roman civilization never did. And it is spot on. Rome evolved from a tiny, muddy farming settlement into a sprawling civilization that fundamentally shaped almost every nation on Earth. The political government definitely collapsed, but the cultural and structural DNA it left behind, that became totally immortal.
So I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. If Rome is genuinely still alive in our laws, our languages, and our architecture, how much of our modern world is really just an echo of that tiny village's ancient hunger for power? It's definitely something to chew on the next time you interact with any of our modern institutions. Thanks so much for joining this explainer today, and remember, always keep questioning the history that's right in front of you.